Welcome, everyone. We'll get started in a moment, just waiting for the Zoom room to fill up. Thank you for joining us this afternoon. Good afternoon. Welcome to PNP Live. My name is Margaret Orto, and I'm the events coordinator in the Children and Teens Department of Politics and Prose. Thank you for joining us and tuning into this virtual format where we continue to bring authors and novels to you. I have the pleasure of hosting our event this afternoon, and I'm delighted to welcome our guest, Eugene Yelchin, who presents his newest book, The Genius Under the Table, Growing Up Behind the Iron Curtain. And let me just show you that cover again. Before we get started, a few housekeeping notes. There is closed captioning available for this event. And if you'd like that option, click on the live transcript at the bottom of your screen and then select show subtitle. You can click the link we will drop into the chat to get your own copy of The Genius Under the Table. Lastly, if you have a question for our author this afternoon, you can click the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen and add one there. At the end of the presentation, we will have time to answer some of your questions. You can also upvote the questions you like and want answered. Now on to introduction. I'm pleased to introduce Eugene Yelchin, who is a Russian-American author, painter, and illustrator. He has written and illustrated many books for children, including the historical fiction book, Breaking Stalin's Nose, which was awarded a Newbery Honor. And just to remind everyone, there we go. And he is also the co-author and illustrator of the 2018 National Book Award finalist, The Assassination of Brangwain Spurge, co-written with M.T. Anderson. And of course, today he presents to us The Genius Under the Table, his poignant and humorous illustrated memoir of growing up in the Soviet Union. And now I'd like to turn the program over to him. Take it away.
Thank you so much, Margaret. Thank you, everyone, for joining us today. It's a very special day for me personally, because it's raining finally. I live in California, and we hadn't had a rain in a long time. So here it is. So it's a happy day already, and I hope you are doing well. So today we'll be doing the following. I will try not to be too boring and tell you a little bit about how the book came out, about the process of making it and thinking about it really, and then perhaps read you the opening of the book. The first two chapters, they're fairly short, so it won't take much time. I'll show you some pictures from the book, and then we'll move on to just talking, question and answer. Whatever you want to ask me, go ahead. If it's about the book, if it's about anything else, I'll be as open with you as I possibly can. Here's a kind of really weird thing, is that I often read nonfiction, or sometimes fiction, about the lost civilizations, about ancient Rome and Egypt and Greece and the civilizations that were extraordinarily powerful at some point and then kind of vanished. And we don't have any survivors. All we have is some little artifacts, little broken statuary buildings, and some written material, right? Some paintings, perhaps. And I'm really attracted to it. I have a large library of those kind of books. And at some point, a couple of years ago, I realized that, wait a second, you come from a lost civilization, because the place that I came from to the United States, that occupied the territory of what we know as Russia, it was actually a country a state rather, that no longer exists. It's gone, and it's gone forever. The name of the country was the USSR, which stands for the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics. And if you think the name is too long, look at the map. You can look up the map of the USSR and you see how enormous that country is, that state was. It occupied 1/6 of the land mass of the entire globe. And so they painted, usually in those old maps, they painted it red, that territory, and they had to write on it that very, very long name. There were 15 republics in it, I believe. Most of them spoke different languages. Russian was predominant. And I grew up in the kind of the main sort of central republic, Russian Republic, a Russian Socialist Republic, in a city that used to be called originally St. Petersburg. And then it's changed its name over the course of its history, I think 4 or 5 times. Now it's called St. Petersburg again. But when I lived there, it was called Leningrad, named after the founder of the USSR, our state, Lenin. So when I realized that I'm kind of a survivor of the lost civilization, I began talking to my brother. My brother is the only survivor from our family, in fact, and he lives nearby, and we would meet for lunch maybe once a week or so and really talk about the past, about our childhood. He's a little bit older than I, and so we belong to different generations. But what was really kind of amazing, we laughed a lot remembering stuff that happened to us as kids. But what was really amazing is that sometimes we would discuss an event in which both of us were present, but our memories about that event were totally different. He saw it in one light, I saw it in a totally different light, where I remember different things. And so that made me kind of interested in how memory actually works. So I started reading a little bit and thinking about it. And what I discovered is that that I was more drawn in terms of just writing. I was more drawn not toward what we know as an autobiography, but to a thing called a memoir. And I kind of, in my head, it was always the same thing, but they aren't. The autobiography is based on very strict facts. It's a nonfiction account that presents exact dates and hours when this or that happened. Memoir relies only on memory. It doesn't attempt to give you the exact dates or exact what weather was on that particular night, who said what. It's kind of open to interpretation. And when I spoke to Victor, my brother Victor, I realized that this is quite interesting, since even our conversation was very much like a dialogue scene in a book or in a movie. We're talking about the same thing. We see the same thing quite differently, and we sometimes agree and sometimes we don't agree. So every scene, when you read a scene, what's interesting about reading a scene in a book, for example, let's say between two people talking, it's like an iceberg. So it's enormous thing of ice, right? Mostly hidden underwater. And above the surface of the water, you just see a little tip. So that little tip is what you read on the page. But in fact, what the conversation is really about and how it reveals both of those characters talking is all hidden underwater. So the thing above the layer, above the surface, is called text, right? And everything underneath is called subtext. And subtext is what's the most interesting. And so you infer, right, as you read a story, sometimes characters know things and sometimes characters don't know things. And so you have to kind of infer what actually is happening if the book is written in the first person. So The Genius Under the Table is written in the first person, from me as a young person. It takes place around about 10 years it begins the first chapter, I'm 6, and in the last chapter, I'm 16. And it covers, basically it covers how I became an artist. That was of interest to me. And that is still of interest to me. And I still, even through writing the book, I'm not sure I quite understand why some people become artists and why others don't. I think the sense of curiosity is very important. And I was very, very curious as a kid. The problem was I couldn't ask any questions because asking questions in our country was dangerous. The USSR was a communist state. It was a very oppressive regime that had a bloody history. Millions, and I mean millions of people were arrested and exiled and executed, and kind of fear of the state, fear of secret police, fear of the government was prevalent in the country while I lived there. And I think I kind of brought a little bit of that fear with me to the United States, not knowing that I actually had it in my luggage. And when things did not go as I thought they would go in the land of opportunities, I couldn't blame the land of opportunities because opportunities were there, but I had to look at myself. What is that I'm doing wrong? And I wasn't doing anything wrong. I was just completely formed by a regime that that scared its citizens. And so I had that fear, and that fear prevented me from doing things. So in a way, all the books that I've written or collaborated on are really kind of about that. It's about whatever the name of the main character is in the book, it's really about me trying to figure out how to kind of overcome fear for the most part. And I think that The Genius Under the Table is a little bit about that, because if you are afraid, you cannot be an artist. So there is a transformation that occurs in the book. At any rate, I think what I should do, if you don't mind, I should maybe read the opening of the book to you, and then I'll show you the pictures. So let me just go ahead and do just that. Hold on. I don't remember it by heart, so I have to look at it. All right. The first time I saw real American tourists, they hopped out of a tourist bus in Red Square in Moscow and cut in front of us in line. Nice manners, my mother shouted. We've been freezing our butts off for hours and they just breathe in like that. We were in line to the mausoleum where the founder of our country, Vladimir Lenin, was laid out, embalmed like an Egyptian mummy. To see him, you had to wait your turn. Making noise near Lenin's mausoleum was forbidden, but the Americans laughed and spoke in loud voices. The Americans and my mother were breaking the rules. Everyone in line was staring at my mom for shouting, but I was staring at the Americans. The American clothes were in vibrant colors I did not know existed. They did not fit in Red Square at all. The square may be called red, but it's black and white in the winter. Most citizens in line were also dressed in black and white. Other colors were brown, army green, navy blue, and the red of our country's banner flopping above the mausoleum. Those were the colors of the Soviet rainbow. My family had come to Moscow to watch my older brother Victor compete in a figure skating competition. But Dad said that our patriotic duty was to see Lenin's mummy first. No one in the long line was allowed to complain, except for my mother, of course. "What are you complaining about, citizen?" the security guard whispered to Mom. He looked nervous that she was making a scene in the most sacred place in our country. "Complaining?" my mother shouted. "You didn't hear me complaining yet, young man. I demand to know your name and rank. Write it down, Victor. Who's in charge around here?" At last, the line began to move, and Mom, having let off a little steam, became perfectly calm. She took my hand and we stepped into the mausoleum by the rules, in silence. The mausoleum was spooky inside. The stone walls reflected no light, and what light could they reflect? There was not a single light bulb anywhere. I rose on my tiptoes, hoping to glimpse the American colors up ahead, but a citizen's back blocked my view. The guards hurried us along the platform on which lay Lenin. I had never seen a dead person before, and this one had been dead since before I was born. "Don't be scared, Yevgeny," Dad whispered to me. "You love Grandfather Lenin." Lenin was grandfather to all Soviet children, which was a little confusing. So many children in our country. How could they all have the same grandfather? I did not know, but it was better not to ask. Asking questions was considered not patriotic. I was 6 years old, and it was my first trip to the capital. While waiting in line, I had been looking forward to seeing Lenin's mummy, but with these vibrant Americans nearby, I suddenly wasn't so sure. Why did I have to look at Lenin anyhow? I knew his face better than my own. Lenin stared at us from everywhere, from postcards and paintings, from banners and pins, from teapots, from money. His statue was in every square, his head and shoulders in every hallway. As for his name, streets, parks, and sports arenas were named after him. Even the city we lived in was called Leningrad. I shuffled by the mummy with my head turned away, but at the last moment I couldn't help myself. I peeked. Lenin's face, glossy like fruit made of wax, glowed in the rosy spotlight. Just below his thin red beard, I saw a narrow strip of tape covered with the paint, the color of the mummy's skin, but this close, still perfectly visible. Oh, why did I look? Lenin had a bandage under his beard. I stumbled out of the mausoleum, hanging onto my mother's arm. Why Lenin have a bandage? Could the mummy scratch itself? I wondered if I could ask Dad about it, but no, it definitely would not be patriotic asking him such a question. The red square was only white now. It was snowing. Behind the snowflakes, the American colors were flashing toward their bus. The Americans would be gone in a minute. A picture of Lenin's bandage, caked over with rosy paint, appeared in my mind. The color made me ill. Why did we have to stay in line all day to see someone dead? Why did we have to learn a poem at school called "Lenin is more alive than all the living"? And why did these Americans take one quick peek at Lenin and could board their bus to go home so they would never have to see the mummy and its bandage again? Why? I could not ask anyone, but a crazy idea shot through my head. If we ran fast now, my family could get on that bus to America too. But instead of us running, a young American, turquoise at the bottom, canary yellow at the top, sprung toward us. His colors sparkled so brightly in the fallen snow. He seemed to float on air. And I wondered if our Soviet force of gravity did not apply to the Americans. He was yelling at us in his language. What is he saying? Mom demanded of Dad. To the American, she said, Parlez-vous français? Dad's face turned banner red. Verboten, understand, go away. Juicy fruit, juicy fruit. The American thrust something into my brother's hand. Give it back at once, Victor, Dad said. Say thank you, Victor, Mom said. I was staring at the narrow strip of glossy wrapper in my brother's hand, the same shape as Lenin's bandage, but of the brightest yellow. I could not take my eyes off it, but somehow I also saw men running at us from all directions and knew, without being told, that they were secret policemen disguised as regular citizens. The American saw them too. He turned around and bolted toward the bus. All at once it got dark. A circle of men in black overcoats had closed around us. What did he give you? One said to Victor. The yellow wrapper disappeared into my brother's pocket. Leave my son alone, Mom shouted. Excuse me, the man said to Mom. No, young man, you will not be excused. Permitting foreigners to cut in line to see our beloved Lenin. Outrageous. Your superiors will hear from me. You can be certain of that. Step aside, citizens. My son is expected at a national figure skating competition. Figure skating my ass, the secret policeman said. Get out of here before I lock you up, you filthy ids. What is it, ids? I asked my brother as Dad hurried us away. That's what some people call Jews, Victor said. We're Jews, don't you know anything? I didn't care. Being called a filthy id did not matter to me at that moment. What mattered was the stick of American chewing gum in my brother's pocket. No chewing gum was sold in our country, and for a good reason. We barely had stuff to eat, let alone stuff to chew that you could not swallow. For 3 weeks afterwards, Victor chewed on that stick of juicy fruit. Nights, he soaked the chewing gum in a cup of tea to keep it soft. By the time I inherited the gum, it had neither taste nor smell. Still, it was better than what I used to chew while pretending to be an American. Black chunks of tar left over from street paving. The tar was so hard, I broke a tooth on it once. So that's kind of the first 2 chapters of the book. They're fairly short, as you can see. Plus, they have tons of pictures. So this is, that's the kind of the beginning of it. This, as you can see, this is my family. All this, my mom, my dad, my grandma, my brother, myself, and this is our grandfather, and his face is cut out from the photograph. And why? I still don't quite know, but you have to read the book to find out, at least what I know. And so when you start reading it, it sort of looks like this. It has pictures on every page, as you can see, and the text is wrapped around the pictures. Here we go. Here they are in mausoleum. There's Lenin laid out. And here's that bandage. And here's that American tourist on the bus and a stick of juicy fruit. And that's it. That's it for these 2 chapters. So anyhow, I hope you got some sense of what it's like. I hope you'll read it. It's a very fast read simply because there are so many pictures in the book, not that much text. You may enjoy it. Anyhow, if you don't mind, I would love to move on to your questions and see what we can talk about. Thank you.
Absolutely. Excuse me. Thank you, Eugene. just those first two chapters really give such a wonderful taste of what you've accomplished here, both in the illustrations and the text. I just wanted to remind the audience, I see we're getting some questions, but just to remind everyone, you can add questions to the Q&A module and we'll get them answered for you. If you are a teacher joining us, and if you have students that are asking questions, if you don't mind just putting the first name, the school, and the grade, and we'll give you guys a shout out. Let me just get started then, if that's okay. I have a question from Sam. How does your family feel about your writing about their lives? And he also notes, your mother sounds very interesting.
Well, there are only two of us left from my family. It's myself and my brother. My father died when he was very young. He was, well, for me, he was very young. He was 52. My mother eventually was able to come to the United States, and she spent a good 10 years here before she passed away. My grandmother passed away after I left the Soviet Union. So the last time I saw her when I was there. What happened to other characters? Well, we know what happened to Mikhail Baryshnikov, who's a ballet dancer, who's a character in the book. But I don't know what happened to, we had a spy living in our apartment. We lived in a communal apartment, but maybe I'll talk about this a little later. Maybe there's a question like that, but that's the answer.
Yeah, just a follow-up question to that. Just curious if you discovered anything new about the various characters as you were writing and thinking about your memoir.
Well, I had two sources to go to. One was my brother, and I relied on his memory quite a bit, and I had to figure out why we saw things in a different light, and what prevented him to see certain things, and what prevented me to see certain things, or wanting to see it in a particular way. Another source was kind of really surprising and stunning. So when my mom passed away, she really didn't leave anything. She was as poor in the United States as she was in the Soviet Union. And the only thing that my brother and I inherited was her diary. And so I kept the diary. After the funeral, I brought it home, and I couldn't look at it. I opened it and I saw her handwriting, and it was too early for me. The pain was a little bit too sharp to start reading it. And surprisingly, it took me almost 10 years to actually read it. So it took a while for me to kind of come around. But when I read it, there were some things in it about our family that I did not know. And that was interesting to learn. But what was the most fascinating thing about her diary was that good half of it, was actually written, and it was like her personal observations day to day, was written as poetry, was written in rhyme, was written in Pushkin, in Alexander Pushkin's meter. And that was kind of fascinating. I had no idea that she was doing it.
That's amazing. Thank you for sharing that. A question from Katie G. Can you talk more about what it was like to grow up with the fear of speaking out? Do you still have that fear now, even though you aren't in danger anymore?
Well, here I am, talking about this. So that fear is gone. I talk, well, fear is gone, most likely. I mean, it certainly formed, as I mentioned, the fear certainly formed the character. you know, as a young person, you take everything at face value. You know, you take everything for granted. So when you grow up in a, you know, in a Nazi Germany or in the communist Russia or in the, you know, in the democratic United States, this is what the world is to you because you don't know any other. You have no reference. You can compare it. So for us, it was whatever it was. You know, that was where we lived, and that was certain rules by which we lived. And one of the major rules was that silence was the means of self-preservation. You know, you reveal yourself when you speak. And so we were, I suppose, allowed to think whatever we wanted, but we were not allowed to say what we wanted. And the discrepancy between thinking one thing and saying another, essentially lying, which is what it is. It's difficult. It's difficult for a young person. It's difficult for grown-ups. My family would never say anything in front of me that could be compromising, that I could repeat by accident or by design at school and get everyone in trouble. And that's the reason why when I showed you the photograph of my, well, drawing really, of my grandfather, I describe it in a book. I mean, I still don't know what exactly happened to him because they will never reveal anything about him to me.
Wow. Yeah, I can just imagine being a young boy, and I mean, so children are always curious, and to have so many questions and then not be able to ask them, that must have been truly a challenging thing for you and for other kids. We have a question from Ellen. When did you leave the USSR and where in the US did you settle? And then a follow-up question is, have you ever gone back to St. Petersburg for a visit?
Right. I left in 1983. I originally lived in Boston for about a year and a half because I knew people there. And then I came to Los Angeles because I went to graduate school here at film school. And I met my wife, my second wife, at the graduate school, and we settled in Los Angeles, where we live now. We have two kids, and that's where we are. What was the follow-up to it? I'm sorry.
The follow-up was, let me just to make sure.
Oh, whether I went back. No.
Have you gone back to visit? Yeah.
No, I had the opportunities to go to design a play and then to work on something else, and I chose not to do it. You know, it's tricky. When I was on the airplane from Moscow to North America, I was under the impression that I'll just go and I'll come back and I'll be going back and forth and this and that. Well, that never happened. And partially the reason for it is that, you know, I started, there were so many books available in the United States about the Soviet Union, fiction and nonfiction. Some of them written by the Soviets, by Soviet dissidents, that were not available to me in Russia. And so, of course, I inhaled them, you know, I still read them. And I began learning things that even if I would want to go back, knowing what I know now about what happened in that country and how my family and other families, everyone was treated there. No, I did not go back and I will not go back there.
Thanks for sharing that. Just a bit of a follow-up question from an audience member. How did your child, I guess you said you have two children, react to the story of your life?
Well, you think they read the book? Yeah, I think my younger kid read the book. Well, they know the story because they know it in bits and pieces, so they were not particular. They always make fun of me. They say I'm like, Borat, Sacha Baron Cohen. They always make fun of me, like I'm Borat. So my children are so American. It's just I'm a weird one in the family.
There's a question from Daisy. Was there anything that you weren't able to include in the book? Any stories or family you would have liked to include?
Well, yes, this is the problem with writing those kind of books, because there's a wealth of events and wealth of information, and you have to make very tough choices. So what you do is, at least what I did, is I looked at it was like an investigation for me. How did I become an artist and why? And so all the events that had some relationship to it ended up in the book, but events that were dealing with other things, whether they were fascinating and interesting events, and there's plenty of those, I had to leave out.
Right.
So that's kind of it. You choose thematically, you choose where the direction of your narrative, and everything that doesn't fit that through line, so to speak, that arc that your character is making in the book, emotional arc that your character is making in the book, just ends up in the trash bin.
Yeah. I'm curious to know, because I think you did that so well, sort of really focusing on that one question and exploring it so passionately and intimately. Were you also a writer when you were growing up, or did that develop later? I know you were, because of the story, I know you were, creating art from an early time.
Yeah, what I did is, my father, and it's also in the book, my father had a really good library he was a big poetry lover, and he had enormous amount of poetry books, but he also had Russian classics in his library, and he had foreign translations. It was quite an unusual library for a man of his salary, so to speak. He could drop half of his monthly salary on a book and nobody would bat an eye, because books were very valuable. We didn't have any distractions. We didn't have, we had 2 channels on television. One would show our political leaders and the other would show sports events. There was not much to do. So we read books. And so as a kid, I started reading very late. I was 8, I think. And so I went straight to my dad's books. And my first books were books for adults, for grown-ups. They were not kids' books. And I read them and I didn't understand a thing, and I kept reading. And then I discovered adventure stories for boys written in the 19th century. And those were just, like action stuff. And so I was so taken with them because they were beautifully published with gorgeous illustrations. And I copied those illustrations. And then I started making my own books. I was maybe 10. And they were short little small books. I have 3 of them still in my house. They were completely stolen from the books I was reading. Like, I have one book that I stole the plot from 3 Musketeers. Another one I stole a plot from the Treasure Island, pirates, musketeers, cowboys, whatever I could get my hands on, I would just, but that's how you learn, I think. That's how we all learn, by looking. Nothing comes out of nothing, We have to look at what was done before us and figure out how it was made. And I think the process of making my own books was just trying to kind of understand the machinery behind the cover.
That was similar to your drawing. Once you started taking lessons, you were imitating. Is that right? What I understand?
Absolutely, I was copying. I was trying to copy the established masters, and my paintings were horrific. But it was interesting to see to kind of decipher. And I'll tell you one little anecdote if we have time. So,
Sure.
so those adventure books for boys, they were those illustrations. I used to stare at them for hours. And at some point, a friend of mine from Leningrad immigrated to Minneapolis, and he was able to bring those books with him. He brought his whole library from Leningrad, and I flew to visit him. And I went to his study and I saw those books, and I haven't seen them for close to, well, over 30 years at that point.
Wow.
And so I pulled one book out, and it was this wonderful Irish, I think he was Irish-American writer who's totally unknown right now, but was very popular in the 19th century, Captain Mayne Reid, his name was. And so I pulled one out and I opened it on illustration. And as I mentioned, I haven't seen it in 30 years, but I remembered every line in that drawing. I could have copied it with my eyes closed. So that's how close I was looking at art.
That's incredible. That's a great story. Thank you. Yeah, I'm just curious, do you have sketches from when you were growing up, or were you not able to?
Well, I have those 3 books. Let me see if
so they included sketches and writing.
Oh yeah, they were illustrated.
Yeah, I gotcha.
Were fully illustrated like my books now. They weren't
Yeah.
that different, really.
That's
Yeah.
great to know. Let me just see, there's another question from Daisy. So, you know, at the beginning of the thing, you talked about the difference between autobiography and memoir, which was really good to hear about. But the question Daisy has is, why did you decide to tell this story as a memoir as opposed to the historical fiction like Breaking Stalin's Nose?
I think the reason for it, it's a good question. The reason for it is as follows. You know, all of my middle grade novels have as a protagonist is a young boy, usually between the ages of 10 and 13. I'm not a very good writer, you know, so the fact that I'm writing in my second language is lunacy. It's insane. I shouldn't be doing. I can barely.
I think I have to beg to differ about not being a good writer.
So when I do write those protagonists, I put myself in their shoes. Essentially, that's what I do. So I'm already present in every single one of my books under a different name, essentially. So I just decided to. Well, I decide? I don't know. I was visiting this school in California, and I was telling the students about my childhood in the Soviet Union. And there was one kid who was, I don't know how old he was, 10 maybe. And he pretty much demanded that I write a book about my childhood. And I didn't kind of take him seriously at first, but then I started thinking about it. And the more I talk about my childhood to students, the more I realized how weird that childhood was. And so it was a good material for something.
Absolutely.
To work on. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you. So I guess that we're winding down with our time, but I guess that kind of does lead into last question, which is, what's next for you? Are you going to continue, and are you thinking of more memoir, or is there something else in the works that you can share with us?
Certainly. The book that will be coming out, I hope next year, is a graphic novel. And it's a memoir, it's nonfiction, and it deals specifically of me. It's for older audience, it's for probably high school and adults, simply because of my age when I left. It was about me leaving the Soviet Union.
Oh, wonderful.
That was about trying to get out of the country and how it all went down. So that's my next project. I'm working on it now.
That sounds terrific. I was hoping you might say something about that. I was hoping that might be what it was.
Okay. Okay.
That's wonderful. So I think that's probably all the time we have right now. But thank you, Eugene, for joining us here today and sharing the genius under the table. Just a reminder to the attendees that there's the opportunity to purchase the book by clicking on the link in the chat. Please join us for other of our virtual events. You can find out by looking at the politicsprose.com website for other upcoming events like this one. And if you also would like to follow us on social media, the Children and Teens Department at Politics and Prose is @KidsandProse. Again, thank you to all of the attendees, and thank you, Eugene, for sharing with us today.
Thank you so much for having me. Thank you very much.
Absolutely. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.